Welcome back, listeners. I'm really excited about this deep dive. It's into the mind of a figure whose name is whispered in hushed tones in occult circles, Eliphas Lévi.
Yes, Eliphas Lévi, a 19th century French occultist, a truly enigmatic figure. And today we're going to be focusing on his work, Paradoxes of the Highest Science, a title that I think already hints at the kind of intellectual journey we're about to embark on.
It does, doesn't it? Paradoxes. Highest science. Right from the start, we're dealing with some pretty weighty concepts. And what makes this even more intriguing is that we're not just looking at Levy's original text, we're also going to be drawing upon the insights of his translator and the annotations of another occultist, someone referred to as EO.
Layers upon layers, a palimpsest of occult thought, if you will. It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion.
With each layer potentially bringing tears to our eyes as we encounter the more pungent truths. And the translator doesn't mince words about the challenges they faced in rendering Levy's work into English. They weren't just aiming for literal accuracy.
No, the goal was something deeper, more elusive. The translator speaks of preserving the intended inner meaning, something that might only be truly accessible to those who know, that is, those who already possess a certain level of occult understanding. It's a translation designed for initiates, in a way.
So not exactly occultism for dummies, then.
Not quite. And this effort to convey both the surface level, the exoteric meaning, and the hidden esoteric meaning led to what the translator describes as sometimes constrained, even awkward language. They're trying to serve two masters, so to speak.
A tightrope walk between clarity and concealment. And then we have the additional layer of EO's annotations and even the translator's own disagreements with both Levy and EO.
Precisely. This isn't a text to be passively absorbed. It demands active engagement, critical thinking, and a willingness to wrestle with ambiguity. There is no single definitive interpretation.
Okay, so let's get into the thick of it. The translator offers a rather pointed assessment of Levy himself. They suggest he was more of a theorist than a practitioner of occultism.
Yes, there's that sense that Lévi was deeply engaged with the philosophical and metaphysical underpinnings of occultism, but perhaps less so with its practical applications, the rituals, the hands-on magical work. He dwelt in the realm of the abstract.
The realm of paradoxes of the highest science. But the translator does acknowledge the presence of what they call real jewels concerning the metaphysics of occultism within Levy's work. What are these jewels and why are they so hard to find?
The jewels are these profound insights into the nature of reality, the workings of the cosmos, the relationship between humanity and the divine. But they're often obscured by what the translator calls a Roman Catholic and Orthodox whitewash.
So Levy couched his ideas in the language and framework of conventional religion.
Precisely. The translator speculates on the reasons for this, partly as a shield against potential church antagonism, partly to avoid alienating readers too drastically, and perhaps even due to some lingering adherence to those religious norms on Levy's part.
It's like he's trying to smuggle radical ideas in a plain brown package.
A very apt analogy. And this leads to some rather pointed advice from the translator. If you're seeking practical guidance on magical techniques, Lévi might not be your best bet. There are likely more direct sources out there.
But for those seeking the ultimate truths of occultism, the underlying philosophy, the core principles.
There, the translator suggests, Lévi offers something truly valuable, perhaps more so than many other readily available authors. But they do caution that approaching his work requires a particular mindset.
Patience for one, I imagine.
Absolutely. The translator warns of encountering what they call twaddle, Lévi's tendency to prioritize style over substance, elegant phrasing over clarity. And then there are the sections where he refutes what the translator sees as irrelevant, even defunct religious arguments. It's a dense forest to navigate.
But there are paths through it for the persistent seeker. The translator even compares Levy's work to a cloth of gold concealing not an inviting heap containing precious pearls amidst shells and sand and even fishy odors.
That's a vivid image. And it speaks to the need for discernment, for an ability to separate the wheat from the chaff, the pearls from the refuse. And to add to the complexity, the translator notes that a hint in one work might illuminate a seemingly obscure passage in another. It's like Lévi has created his own intricate puzzle for the reader to solve. Okay, before we go any further, can we address the elephant in the room? Or rather, the mysterious initials in the room. Who is EO? Ah, the enigmatic EO. The translator ultimately reveals their identity to be none other than the theosophical master of the wisdom known as K.H. This comes out in an 1883 footnote, firmly placing these annotations within a theosophical context. There's even a note that K.H. was among the first in those circles to suggest that Jesus Christ lived a century BC, which adds another intriguing historical layer to these commentaries.
So we're dealing with the thoughts of Éliphas Lévi, the interpretations and disagreements of his translator, and the insights of a key figure in early theosophy. All right, let's dive into the paradoxes themselves. The very first one that Lévi tackles is the concept of religion itself. He calls it essentially paradoxical.
Yes, he describes religion as a realm where fictions are presented as more true than literal truth, vaster than infinity, and more enduring than eternity. It's like saying that the language of religion, the language of the sacred, operates on a level beyond our everyday logic and comprehension.
And he offers a particularly striking example of this paradox in our conception of God as the ideal of man.
What he presents is a series of inherent contradictions in the way we envision the divine. God is described as substantial, yet without substance, personal, yet without definition, immutable, yet transforming, omnipotent, yet seemingly struggling with human frailties.
It's almost like saying that our very attempts to grasp the nature of God are inherently flawed, destined to fall into contradiction.
Precisely. And he then goes on to point out that we tend to project our own qualities, both the noble and the flawed, onto the divine, essentially creating a God in our own image.
So a wrathful God for a warlike people.
Exactly. Or a compassionate God for those seeking solace and mercy. The point being that our conception of the divine is never purely objective. It's inevitably shaped by our own cultural and personal lenses.
He then turns his attention to a specific example of this paradoxical tendency within religious practice, the Catholic Mass, specifically the doctrine of transubstantiation.
Yes, this is where things get really interesting. He presents a passionate exclamation, likely either his own or that of someone grappling with the seeming absurdity of consuming bread and considering it an act of communion with Christ. Yet alongside that intellectual struggle, he acknowledges the powerful feeling of communion that can arise from this act. It's like a head versus heart dilemma.
The intellect saying, this is just bread, and the heart saying, I feel a connection to something greater. But he then notes a sense of something lacking, a feeling that this material substance is neither eternal nor vast, enough to truly embody the divine.
That's the paradox, the tension between the symbolic representation and the literal reality, or the lack thereof. And it speaks to the immense power of ritual and belief in creating a sense of the sacred, even when it seemingly defies logical explanation.
From there, he moves on to what is perhaps a less abstract and certainly a more unsettling paradox, that of religion and violence.
He highlights the selective justification of violence throughout history, pointing to events like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where a brutal act was framed as a necessary response to a perceived threat. Yet the Inquisition is condemned without reservation. It's a demonstration of how the same religious doctrines can be used to both condone and condemn acts of extreme violence.
A sobering reminder of the potential for religion to be used to justify all manner of atrocities. And then there's the paradox of God repenting having made humankind, and humans repenting having made a God.
It's almost a mirroring of regret, isn't it? He connects this to the historical succession of what he calls divine fictions. Jupiter giving way to Jehovah, Jehovah giving way to the feather of Jesus, as interpreted by the papacy. It's like humanity keeps trying to create a God that fits its evolving understanding.
But never quite getting it right.
Or perhaps always getting it right for that particular time and place, only to need a new conception as understanding evolves.
The next paradox he explores is the concept of redemption as an act of solidarity among people.
Here, he's touching upon the theological idea of vicarious atonement, where the suffering of the innocent is somehow seen as atoning for the sins of the guilty. He presents it as a demonstration of our interconnectedness, the idea that individual actions have ripple effects and that justice doesn't always operate on a strictly individual level.
Then there's the metaphor of Catholicism as the Sphinx, devouring those who don't correctly answer its riddle.
He suggests that approaching Catholicism without understanding its underlying mysteries can lead to spiritual misfortune, much like Oedipus facing the Sphinx. But then there's this interesting twist in the advice given to intelligent Catholics.
Don't abandon the church. Stay and work to enlighten others from within.
Exactly. The argument being that there is no true religion outside the pale of Catholicity. But here, EO offers a crucial clarification.
The universality of truth.
Precisely. EO suggests that Catholicity in this context should be understood as universality, shifting the emphasis from a specific institution to a broader, all-encompassing spiritual principle.
A much more inclusive perspective. He then touches upon the paradox that the very rationale of religion is to be irrational, that its essence is supernatural.
This gets to the heart of the tension between faith and reason. He's pointing out that religion, by its very nature, deals with things that are beyond our ability to fully comprehend or explain logically. It rests upon a belief in something greater than ourselves, something that transcends our everyday experience. And he goes on to say that God himself is supersubstantial, existing within the infinite expanse as its knowledge and power.
So trying to define God with our limited human intellect is like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup.
A beautiful analogy. He then addresses the question of whether Éliphas Lévi himself was an atheist, and this is where we see a clear disagreement between EO and the translator.
EO seems quite certain that Lévi was an atheist.
Yes, he even calls him a poet, perhaps suggesting that his use of religious language was more metaphorical or artistic. But the translator vehemently disagrees, arguing that Levi's position wasn't a denial of God's existence, but rather a statement about the inherent limitations of human perception. Lévi, according to the translator, believed that God manifests only within the realm of what humanity and nature are capable of experiencing.
So not a denial of a higher power, but a focus on the knowable aspects of the divine.
Precisely. And this leads us into another fascinating area of exploration, the relationship between reason and faith in Levi's thought.
A very important distinction to make. Thank you for clearing that up. Okay, the next big idea is that reason is God. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and he backs it up by referencing the beginning of the Gospel of St. John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Or word, or perhaps reason, as the foundational principle of creation.
Exactly. He argues that everything that exists is brought forth through reason, that it has a reason for being. Even things that appear unreasonable ultimately serve a purpose in contrast to reason, much like shadow defines light.
So reason isn't just a tool for thinking, it's a fundamental force that permeates all of existence.
Yes, but he also makes a crucial distinction between reasonable belief and rash infatuation.
What's the difference?
Reasonable belief involves acknowledging the existence of something greater than our current knowledge, accepting the possibility of the infinite even if we can't fully grasp it. Rash infatuation, on the other hand, is a blind leap of faith, accepting things without any grounding in understanding or critical assessment.
It sounds like he's calling for a more thoughtful and discerning approach to faith.
Precisely. And he goes on to say that any positive definition we try to apply to God will inevitably be deniable because the infinite, by its very nature, defies finite definition.
We can't put God in a box, so to speak.
Exactly. And he even offers this rather provocative analogy matter as the excretion of thought. It's a jab at materialist philosophies that reduce thought to a mere byproduct of physical processes.
A bold reversal of perspective. He also suggests that God reveals himself through the beauty of nature and the words of the wise and just.
He draws upon examples from a wide range of traditions, from the ancient Greeks to the Psalms, the Vedas, the Quran, and even the narratives of Krishna. It's a very inclusive perspective, suggesting that the divine can be glimpsed across cultures and throughout history.
But he then makes a very strong statement about the nature of those gods who demand human sacrifice.
He calls them demons, arguing that any deity that demands the taking of human life is not a true god, but something demonic. And he even presents the paradoxical idea that those who believe in the devil are, in essence, worshiping his creator, God.
So reason should always be our guide in discerning the true from the false, the divine from the demonic.
Precisely. He concludes his exploration of reason and faith by outlining what he sees as the hallmarks of true religion, piety, and faith.
What are those hallmarks?
True religion, he says, is the eternal religion, the universal principles that transcend specific dogmas. True piety is independent, not reliant on external authority. True faith is absolute, capable of illuminating all symbols. And the true God is the God of reason, whose worship is expressed through love and liberty.
So a very humanist and universalist perspective on spirituality. He also briefly touches upon the acts of breaking idols and burning images.
He offers a pragmatic justification for these acts, arguing that early Christians and Protestants were justified in destroying religious objects because they are being forced to venerate them. But he also acknowledges that there can be divinity in great works of art, suggesting a distinction between enforced idolatry and the appreciation of sacred art.
So it's not a blanket condemnation of religious art, but a rejection of forced worship of material objects. That leads us quite naturally into the next set of paradoxes, those surrounding love and knowledge.
He begins by making this rather profound statement. Love is the realization of the impossible.
That's quite a
He
statement.
describes it as the omnipotence of the ideal, the force that elevates the soul beyond the limits of nature and science. And he connects this to Jesus' commandment to love God and neighbor, interpreting it as a call to love above all else and to love oneself and one's neighbor.
So genuine self-love is inextricably linked to the love of others.
Exactly. And he then presents the symbolic story of Eve offering divinity to Adam and Adam following her even into death as an act of profound love and solidarity.
A reinterpretation of the fall in a way.
Precisely. He then goes on to say that when the world truly learns to love, it will be saved,
Mm.
and that a person who knows how to love attracts all souls. But he contrasts this with the negative impulses of coveting, exacting, enslaving, and jealousy. True love is selfless and giving.
It seeks the good of the other, not just its own gratification. He then turns his attention to the symbolism at the foot of the cross, the Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene.
This juxtaposition highlights the paradoxical nature of grace and redemption. You have the Virgin Mary, representing purity and sinless conception, alongside Mary Magdalene, the acknowledged sinner who receives Christ's blessing. And he points out how Jesus suffers silently for the unrepentant malefactor while offering pardon to the repentant one. It's a complex interplay of justice and mercy.
And it speaks to the inclusivity of divine love, extending even to those who seem undeserving. The next paradox he explores is the idea that knowledge is the ignorance or negation of evil.
He cites Christ's words, "They know not what they do," as evidence for this. The argument being that true evil is rooted in ignorance, a lack of understanding of the consequences of one's actions. He asks, how could a rational being with perfect discernment do evil?
So evil isn't so much a deliberate choice as it is a consequence of blindness or delusion.
Yes. And he provides a whole range of examples of actions driven by ignorance, from the creation of capricious gods to the perpetuation of harmful social structures. He attributes everything from pride and avarice to the atrocities of despots and revolutionaries to this fundamental lack of understanding.
So knowledge in this sense is a kind of antidote to evil.
Precisely. He then makes the assertion that no one knowingly deceives themselves, and that the power of attraction is proportional to knowledge. We are drawn to what we perceive as good, and the more knowledge we have, the better we can discern what is truly good.
And he offers these pithy sayings about life, suffering, happiness, and power, all tied to the pursuit of knowledge.
To live is to suffer, but to know how to live is to be happy. To love is to obey, but to know how to love is to rule.
Those are powerful statements. And finally, he revisits the traditional Catholic catechism answer to the question of why God created humanity and offers a reinterpretation that aligns with his emphasis on love, knowledge, and service.
The traditional answer to know, love, and serve God for eternal life is reframed as to love, God manifested in nature and humanity, to learn universal science as true theology, and to serve humanity, which is to serve God.
So a beautiful synthesis of the spiritual and the ethical. All right, now we're getting into some truly esoteric territory, the paradoxes of imagination and will.
He starts off by calling imagination the greatest magician in the universe, the source of poetry, dreams, fables, legends, even the appearance of gods and angels.
Wow.
He emphasizes its power to shape our perceptions of reality, to fuel both hope and despair, and to exaggerate both good and evil. And he makes this very strong claim, quote, "People devoid of imagination never accomplish anything great."
So imagination isn't just for artists and dreamers, it's a fundamental creative force.
Exactly. He says that even scientists rely on imagination to conceive of possibilities beyond what is currently known. And he even goes so far as to say that God is the imagination of nature.
That's a really intriguing concept.
It suggests that the very creative force behind the natural world is akin to a vast cosmic imagination. He then gives examples of how imagination can seemingly work miracles.
Like what?
He points to stories of churches rising from the earth due to the visions of children, imaginative interpretations of biblical events like Joshua stopping the sun, and even the concept of transubstantiation.
So it's not about literal miracles, but the power of belief and collective imagination to shape perceived reality.
Exactly. He then moves on to this seemingly paradoxical statement: the will accomplishes everything which it does not desire.
How can that be?
He's referencing Prince Sakyamuni, the Buddha, and the idea that true will arises from a state of detachment, free from the tyranny of our desires and fears. To attain perfect will, you must want nothing else because you already possess everything you truly need.
It sounds like he's describing a state of complete inner peace and freedom.
Exactly. And he goes on to describe the qualities of a person who has attained this state of equilibrium. someone who finds contentment in solitude, connects easily with people of all ages, is patient with those who lack understanding, and finds joy in the company of the wise.
A true master of themselves. And he ends this section by emphasizing that the true life of man is not in himself, but in others, and that carrying one's cross means bearing life's burdens with courage and resilience.
A powerful message about the importance of human connection and the strength that comes from facing life's challenges. Now, let's move into what is perhaps one of the most intriguing sections, the paradoxes of magic and occultism.
Yes, the heart of the matter. He starts off by noting the shift in perceptions of magic throughout history.
From a time when it was feared and viewed with suspicion to a more modern era where it's often dismissed or ridiculed. But he then presents the occultist's perspective that both the miracles of saints and the phenomena attributed to demons are simply natural results of causes operating outside the realm of ordinary experience.
So magic isn't supernatural, it's just a deeper level of natural law.
Precisely. He then introduces the professor of the highest science who studies Kabbalah and ancient magical doctrines.
What does this professor believe?
They believe that these ancient traditions represent the noblest and truest science, and they lament that they are so misunderstood. They seek to make these teachings known, believing that the true science of magism is encoded in the Kabbalah, Egyptian, and Indian symbols.
So a belief in the profound wisdom of these ancient occult traditions. He also touches upon the idea that a true prophet often makes enemies by predicting more evil than good, and that the occult sciences should be kept hidden.
The reasoning here is that the initiate who speaks openly risks profaning knowledge and exposing it to those who are not ready to understand or use it wisely. There's a sense of caution, a belief that some knowledge is too dangerous to be shared indiscriminately.
The need for discretion and discernment, and then he gets into the dangers of believing without knowledge, using this term kiter.
Kiter is described as a rash or uncritical belief that leads to a kind of overconfidence and presumption. It's the danger of accepting things blindly, without understanding, which can lead to belief in the absurd.
So critical thinking is essential even, or perhaps especially, when dealing with esoteric matters. He then explores the concept of theurgy, often associated with ascetic practices.
Theurgy is described as a state where dreams can take on a terrifying reality for someone who believes they are awake. And this state is often attained through the practices like fasting and intense meditation, which can actually weaken and overexcite the brain, leading to hallucinations and what are perceived as nightmares and demons.
So the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment can, paradoxically, lead to states of delusion and even psychological harm if not undertaken carefully.
Exactly. And finally, he acknowledges the existence of elementals in the Kabbalistic tradition, such as sylphs, undines, gnomes, and salamanders.
Those nature spirits.
Precisely. And he suggests that even apparitions, like visions of the Virgin Mary, could be interpreted within this framework, not as direct divine interventions, but as manifestations of these elemental forces or even the collective unconscious.
So a more naturalistic explanation for phenomena that are often attributed to the supernatural. Next, he tackles the concepts of Trinity, incarnation, and redemption, but he approaches them from a very different angle.
He presents them not as strict theological doctrines, but as symbolic representations of universal principles. Trinity as unity, incarnation as humanity, and redemption as solidarity. And he suggests that these three principles, unity, humanity, and solidarity, will form the trilogy of the future, offering up a peaceful solution to the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity.
So he's looking for a practical, social application of these traditionally religious concepts.
Exactly. He sees them as guides for creating a more just and harmonious society, and he then makes this rather provocative statement. Catholicism is official occultism resting on mystery. He's pointing out that Catholicism, with its reliance on unexplained mysteries, rituals, and symbolism, shares a fundamental characteristic with occult traditions. He says that while the secret of the sanctuaries has been profaned, its deeper esoteric meaning has not been fully explained or understood by the masses.
So a hidden layer of meaning beneath the surface rituals.
Yes. And he goes on to say that the great symbols of the past are prophecies of the future, and that mysteries and miracles are essential for the masses to feel deeply about things they don't fully understand.
It sounds like he's suggesting a deliberate use of the unexplained to maintain social order.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
He then turns his attention to Freemasonry and its great secret, the science of nature itself. He points out that this knowledge has, to a large extent, been made public, But Freemasons still maintain their oaths of secrecy as a gesture of respect for the ancient traditions of occultism.
So not a hidden magical formula, but a reverence for the mysteries of the natural world. He then draws an analogy between the official church and the occult church, using the concept of social castes mirroring a natural hierarchy.
It's the idea that just as there are inherent differences in human capacity and inclination, so too are there different levels of understanding and initiation within both the exoteric and esoteric realms.
A complex interplay of the seen and the unseen. And he ends this section by talking about the cyclical nature of truth, how protest can be truth, but sects can become falsehoods.
He emphasizes that true religion is Catholicity, understood as universality, but that Catholicism as a specific partisan entity can also fall into falsehood. He points out that all religions have both respectable and defective sides.
A call for nuanced understanding and tolerance. And finally, he reveals what he calls the great secret of magic. Drum roll, please.
It is this: not to succumb to the forces of nature, but to direct them. Not to be enslaved by them, but to make use of them for the benefit of immortal liberty.
So mastery over nature, not for selfish gain, but for spiritual liberation.
Precisely. He then goes on to talk about the nature of nature itself, saying that while nature is intelligent, it is not free. Even celestial bodies operate with a kind of instinctive soul.
So a cosmos imbued with a kind of consciousness.
Yes. And he says that for humans to truly command the Earth's soul requires a high degree of knowledge, wisdom, or exaltation. He then touches upon the idea of the devil performing miracles, defining these miracles as anything that estranges humanity from science and reason.
So the devil's work is to promote ignorance and superstition.
Exactly. He then describes the Earth's resistance to both the sun and humankind, its reluctance to yield its fruits, its tendency to produce imperfect species. He even says that warfare is the inevitable condition of existence, and that might does not take precedence of right, it constitutes it.
A rather bleak view of the natural world.
It is. And he connects these mysteries of nature to the mysteries of religion, suggesting that even Darwin's ideas can be seen as explanations for Christ's teachings.
A fascinating attempt to reconcile science and religion.
Indeed. And then we arrive at his final paradoxes.
Let's hear them.
The first one revisits the purpose of creation, arguing that if, as Jesus said, what we do to our neighbor, we do to God, then God created humans to know, love, and serve each other as the path to eternal life. True worship, therefore, is philanthropy.
Love of humanity as the highest expression of the divine.
Exactly. He then talks about how we often deceive ourselves by thinking that pleasure is always good and inconvenience is always bad, leading to a kind of moral confusion.
The allure of instant gratification.
Yes, and then he tackles the figure of Lucifer, not as an embodiment of evil, but as the light bearer, the mediator between thought and life. He rejects the idea of evil as an intelligent rival to God, calling it a monstrous fiction.
So Lucifer as a necessary force within the cosmic order.
Precisely. He then emphasizes the importance of seeking the spirit of religious dogmas while accepting their letter, even if it seems absurd, suggesting that these seemingly illogical statements are actually codes designed to prompt deeper understanding.
So an allegorical interpretation of religious doctrine.
Yes. And finally, he challenges the tendency to attribute human vices like pride, luxury, anger, and sloth to God, arguing that these are projections of our own limitations.
Stripping away the human from the divine.
Exactly. And he concludes by saying that the human spirit constructs the impossible in its quest to attain the infinite, leading to a perspective where the supernatural can be understood as natural.
So a journey from the limited to the limitless? Well, that was quite a journey through the mind of Éliphas Lévi, guided by his translator and the enigmatic K.H. I hope you, our listener, found it as thought-provoking as we did. It's a testament to the power of paradox, the idea that truth often resides in the spaces between seemingly contradictory ideas.
Indeed. The very act of wrestling with these paradoxes, of seeking the hidden pearls amidst the shells and sand, can itself be a path to deeper understanding.
What paradox resonated most with you, listener? We love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those hidden truths.